Welcome to this year's Nordic Climate Forum for Construction. My name is Ingunn Marton. This year the forum is hosted by Norway, and there is more than 300 persons that have signed up for this event. And this is the fourth forum, and we are making this year as a hybrid webinar, so there are some people attending in this room. So welcome to you all. In 2018, the Nordic minister decided to harmonize the building regulation as it should be strengthened. And this forum is arranged by the building authorities in the Nordic countries. Earlier forums has been in Malmö, Copenhagen and Reykjavik. So I have some practical information before I introduce today's moderator. There will be some time for questions after each session, and you have to use the chat for questions or comments. And then I'll introduce Maria from Swedish Life Cycle Center as the moderator, and she will take you through the program. So welcome, Maria.
Thank you so much, and so nice to be here, both to you who are online and to you who are here in the room. So, a quick read through the program before we're going to listen to some really interesting presentations. We will start with the first block of the program, which is policy development of the regulations of CO2 reductions in buildings. After that, there will be a brief coffee or snacks break. After that, we will move into development of limit values for CO2 emissions in buildings in the Nordic countries. And then we will have another coffee, tea, or snacks break. Before we will move into the last part of the program, which is actually in two parts. First, we will hear presentations of climate declarations and BIM, how to practically report CO2 emissions for buildings. And then we will have two presentations of Nordic programs that will end this webinar. And with that, we will actually welcome our first presenter, who will present the worldwide policy development, Panu Passanen. Welcome.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for being able to present here. Sorry for not being able to do so in person. So my name is Panu Passanen from Helsinki, Finland, and I'm going to talk about European Construction LCA Policy Review. So for the moment, Europe is still the leader in terms of regulations for construction lifecycle assessment, but other countries are catching up rapidly. Due to the, let's say, more heterogeneous structure of the North American main countries, United States and Canada, they are moving forward at the provincial level, in Canada also to some extent at the federal level. Also quite significant funds are being allocated in the Inflation Reduction Act. So while United States is not a leader, they are very determined at moving forward on this. And in Asia, we also see positive things evolving, and very recently we had a first mover in Middle East to actually implement anything resembling a building LCA there in the voluntary side. That's it for the global context, but Europe needs to clearly keep up the pace to continue to be the leader. We are doing a project, European Construction LCA Regulations Review, which is due to publish this fall. And this project has been generously supported by the Finnish government through the Ministry of Environment and the Dutch government through the Netherlands Enterprise Agency. So thank you for making this possible. We cover in this work the three countries with regulations in force: Sweden, Netherlands, France, the other Nordic countries which are putting forward regulations, as well as a few other Central European countries plus UK, which have rules or systems for public projects, and we where we may have the basis of, let's say, future regulations for the broader market. This is a fairly technical study. It's made for the people who need to design and implement regulations. So we are looking at number of detailed parameters. We are looking at the review overview level, 12 countries plus EU as a block, all where governments are active in this basically. And then of course there's many countries in EU where governments do not show any activity, or let's say material activity as far as we can tell in this matter. And then for the countries where regulations are in place or underway, we look at three different things. We look at how the regulation itself works. Does it apply, for example, a limit value? When is it required, and so on. Then we look at the details of the methodology, some special interest topics such as end of life, biogenic carbon reused materials, decarbonization of grid, and others. And then we also look at how it's supported by LCA data and databases. And there we look at range of database specific factors. Today, I'm just introducing the topic, so I'm not going to go into the results of the study, but I will simply mention what are the systems that we're looking at, and then I'm talking a bit about what we think are the best practices. We are covering, unsurprisingly, the Nordic systems, the French Erreur 2020, the Dutch MPG, the British Part Z, which is obviously not even in the government program yet, but has been tabled as a member of Parliament's bill. And in the UK, we have a regulation in force on the Greater London area issued by the Greater London Authority, which is very similar in content to the Part Z. So we have 11 million people in the UK already subject to regulatory condition. So that makes the UK quite interesting, let's say, area to look at from our point of view. We are also looking at the EU mainly. Relevance here is this matter is being mentioned in the Energy Performance for Buildings Directive. And that's the scope of the regulations that we cover in the report. Some cursory data provided in this table, more to be found in the report when we release it. We are likewise covering a number of databases. There's some difference between the regulations and databases here, because Belgium, for example, doesn't have a building LCA regulation, but does have a governmental regulation for construction products and database, whereas in Norway, there's a regulatory program for building LCA, but no matching database as of present, unless you're going to tell otherwise today, which we obviously couldn't have known in preparation of the study. You can find here some cursory data about the different databases that are used in these various programs, what kind of data they contain, and obviously, again, more in the report. Then getting into what I believe is the main interest for today's purpose of the study, which is what does good look like? So what is the best practice? Of course, what does good look like cannot be evaluated purely objectively. You have to define it somehow, and we have defined it as follows. For the regulations themselves, we have evaluated it based on decarbonization, impact, and policy openness. I will explain these two criteria now. Decarbonization impact is assumed to be the purpose of doing these regulations, so that actually the industry decarbonizes. And we assess this based on broad scope of regulation, so it covers the entire building, that it applies limit values, it uses top-up factors for generic data, it applies pre- and post-assessment to increase impact. All of these factors are seen as positive. So here we are applying evaluation of quite many different factors. And then in the policy openness, we are assuming that use of international standards here, well, European standards, in fact, ability to use EPDs from any supplier within the common market or single market, and being able to tools from different suppliers all increase efficiency for the industry. So decarbonization, impact, and policy openness are the dimensions that we are looking at. It's possible, of course, to look at many other dimensions. These are the two that we have selected for the interests of this study. And we have evaluated these on 1 to 10, each criteria for every country, based on the judgment of the project team with predefined criteria for this course. So that's it for the regulation. Then in regards to the databases, we have evaluated 4 different criteria: availability, access, cost, and quality. In the availability and access, we have considered scope of data, so if it's broad or not, if it is easily accessible for anybody, and if it's possible to get the data in a digital format or not. All have been seen as important to increase the impact of this work, being able to generate different kind of automated tools and to use the data for more use cases. Then in cost and quality, we are evaluating process and frequency and adherence to standards, which are all seen as factors which reduce costs, and then there's other factors which increase the quality of the database. These are the different dimensions we are looking at. So we are looking at basically 2 different dimensions for regulations and 2 different dimensions for databases. And what does good look like, in our opinion, is in the following. The Swedish and the proposed Norwegian text, the Norwegian text, let's say, are squarely in the transparency category. So they have low decarbonization impact, which is the horizontal axis. They are clearly very open policies. This is obviously conscious, and the Swedish government does conduct a hearing on limit values, which will make it move more towards the right, whereby the decarbonization impact will increase. In the right-hand side of the chart, we have the most impactful policies as evaluated by our assessment method for decarbonization. The French Arrêt 2020 is basically filling all the criteria. There may be other criteria that could be evaluated, but it fulfills all the criteria in our evaluation. And in spite its, let's say, very limited openness and maybe other areas of improvement, of which there are quite many, it comes out the most impactful. The other highly impactful policies are the Dutch MPG, the bärighetsuitdigheidsklassen, and the Finnish method, and the Part Z and GLA method from the UK. All of these are among the more impactful methods. They are mainly differentiated by the level of openness, whereby the MPG and the Arrêt 2020, they are extremely closed and also quite expensive methods for the industry to implement, at least in some cases. So we hope that the evaluation here, while subjective, can provide pointers on what areas to consider for the future development of policies. We don't particularly recommend the route of Dutch or French governments because of the costs imposed to the market participants and due to the technical risks it entails. We have done similar assessment for databases, which you can see here. The databases are evaluated based on availability and access on the horizontal axis and the cost and quality on the vertical axis. Belgian EPD program BEPD is not squarely intended to do the same thing as the other databases because it's supporting a different kind of regulatory purpose. So it can't be fully evaluated on the same way. So it's obviously also the least advanced using the criteria which are relevant for whole building LCA type of applications. Here among the leaders we have INIES, Ökobaudat, and the Dutch NMD. Whereas we have very good results from also from the Finnish and Swedish, which end up on the same position here in terms of being able to provide robust access to the data, even though there are, like, let's say, maybe more room for optimization in terms of some of the methodologies being implemented. We have also included in this evaluation the robustness of the digital infrastructure in place. This we find to be very good in all of the databases on the right-hand side, excepting the Dutch NMD, which has a fairly immature digital infrastructure in spite of being in place for quite a long time. So that much for the introduction of the study. We are One-Click LCA. We do LCA and EPD software worldwide, 100 people doing it. And if you have some questions or interest in LCA, we are also training people for free. So we have an EPD bootcamp in a week's time starting, and more than 2,000 people signed up already. But there's still place for you as well. That's it for my part. In case there are any questions, I will do my best to answer.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Panu, for a great presentation. As was said in the beginning, we will use the chat for questions, and we will have a block when questions can be asked after these 4 first presentations. So we will move on in the program. So I would like to welcome Brigitte Jacquemont from the European Commission. Yes. No? Yes.
Good morning. So thank you very much for this invitation. We are very pleased to be here with my colleague. I work at DG Energy, and I will give you an overview of the EU policy related to building, and then I will focus on the Energy of Performance Directive, and in particular on LCA. But really to start with, really our main priority at the European Commission is really to go further and faster to tackle the climate crisis. This is one of the main objectives, and we have the so-called the European Green Deal. This is our blueprint for this crisis, and I would like really to focus on 2 important dates. So the EU aims to be climate neutral by 2050, and the most important midterm goal is to cut greenhouse gas emission by more than half, so by 55% by 2030, so in less than 10 years. So this, we can see it's very ambitious, and it provides really a clear role for energy efficiency in building. If we have a look to the 2030 goals, we have the so-called Fit for 55 package, and we are really updating EU law in order to meet this target. And so the Energy Performance Building Directive is part of this package, and the strategy is really based on 3 pillars. You have energy efficiency, energy saving, electrification, and of course boosting renewables and innovation. I will shortly also go on the main strategic document. So you have the renovation wave. It was launched in 2020. So the goal is really to double the renovation rate and to foster deep renovation. What is very interesting is that it's an holistic approach for the built environment, and circular economy and life cycle thinking are important dimensions of this document. And to finish on the overall picture, some word of a Repower EU plan. So it's following the Russian attack to Ukraine. It's the European Commission plan to reduce the dependence on Russian fossil fuel and also to foster the green transition. So the Repower EU plan is a plan for energy saving, for producing clean energy, so boosting renewables and diversifying energy supplies. But this plan has an impact also on the building side, And a new article is, it is proposed to include a new article in the Energy Performance Directive to include the deployment of solar technologies on commercial and public buildings and also for all new residential. So it is an additional article to the EPPD. And also the European Commission really call to increase the ambition and the adoption of the Fit for 55 package. And some key figure that you may know regarding the European building stock. So we are talking about 24 billion square meters, and 74% it's residential. And important characteristic is that 85% of this stock was built before 2000. So before the requirement in the regulation. So it's why we have now 75% with a poor energy performance. And if we go see at the transformation of the stock, you have 11% of the stock with undergo renovation, but only 1% concerning energy performance. So we can see that really significant effort is needed for buildings. So if I really focus on the energy performance of building directive, so really, as I said, part of the Fit for 55 package, they are strong linked with other initiative called Energy Efficiency Directive, ETS, Renovation Directive. In Repower EU, so it's really a call to the co-legislator, so to the Council and the Parliament to make the Fit for 55 more ambitious. And the proposal was put on the table so last December. And now the discussion have started in the Council under the French presidency, and they are ongoing under the Czech presidency, and they should end during the Swedish presidency. So interesting for you. And we have the discussion has also started, of course, in the European Parliament. So the objective of the EPPD, it's really twofold. So on one hand is really to contribute to reducing the greenhouse gas emission and the final energy consumption. And with the current geopolitical context, it's more important than ever. But also it's important to include the EPPD in a longer term goal. So it's really to put us in the right pathway for the 2050 decarbonization goal. And in a nutshell, you can see the 4 focus areas of the EPPD. You have renovation, of course, decarbonization. Some provisions are regarding modernization and system integration, and of course on financing. And with financing, the priority is really to the vulnerable household. Sorry for the slide. Regarding, if we want to have this new vision for the building stock, so it was important to introduce a new definition for zero-emission building, what we mean by zero-emission building. So it's really a building, so it's for the new building and also for the overall building by 2050. So the idea is really to have a building with a very high energy performance. So it's translate the energy efficiency principle, and it should be covered by energy from renewable sources. And you have also some requirement to foster e-mobility and so on. But if you just stop here, we won't be able to decarbonize the full building stock. So we have to look beyond to the full life cycle of the building. We have to look what's going before and after the use of the building. And so it is why it's the first stage in the EPPD to introduce, to address carbon emission. And we have 2 provisions for this. So one, it's in the National Building Renovation Plan. So they must include policy on reduction of full life cycle greenhouse. So we have this provision, and the other provision is to have a mandatory calculation of the whole life cycle global warming potential for new building and large building. And this will be reported in EPCs. If you want to, just to mention that this is a directive, so of course, member states can be more ambitious because as in the Nordic country, you are working a lot on this. So it's to show the way also to the other country. Regarding the global warming potential, so we don't define the calculation method. It's just to we make reference to levels. So the European framework, it was already mentioned by the other colleagues, and this method refers to the EN 15978. We are talking about tools, also there's flexibility regarding the tool and the data. We are referring for the construction regulation, the construction product regulation, what it will be available. If I go very briefly regarding the other provisions, so you have some one on a more short term. The idea is really to introduce minimum energy performance standard. The idea is really to trigger an efficient energy renovation of building, starting with the worst performing one. We have introduced also definition of deep renovation and various other provision on existing building. And regarding the main provision on information tools, maybe just to flag that we want to strengthen the energy performance certificates. So the idea is really to have an harmonized scale at European level from A to G. And it's really a work to try to have more harmonized on this very important tool. You have some links. If you have more information regarding the revision, I will be happy to reply to questions.
Thank you. All right, so we are going to move on to the next presenter. Right. Just going to make this work. All right, Josefina Lindblom, very welcome.
Thank you.
We'll talk about whole life carbon.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks a lot. Thanks for having me here. That's really, really nice. I joined you in Malmö a couple of years ago, but since then we haven't met up in real life. So great to be here again. I'm going to talk about whole life carbon in EU building policy. You've already heard from my colleague Brigitte how that concept is now entering into the discussion on the Energy Performance of Buildings Directive. There's some more happening there, and I wanted to show you, give you a bigger picture perhaps. And also I wanted to start with why is whole life carbon important in the first place? It's because it's, to many it is a fairly new concept, although I'm of course very much aware of that in the Nordics there is already a lot of attention on this. But just to say that if you look at the full life cycle of a building, then this sector is responsible for about half of all our extracted material, half of our energy consumption, a third of water is related to buildings, and a third of our construction and demolition waste, a third of our total generated waste is construction and demolition waste. All of this results in a lot of carbon emissions, so not just during the use phase when we heat and cool, but also during other life cycle stages before and after the use. And I think this is quite a nice profile. I've taken it from a London work. Now I don't remember exactly what LETI stands for, but I'm sure many of you know. But anyway, this is a profile, just a general one, which shows what it can easily look like. The yellow one is the operational carbon over the life cycle of a building, and the pink one is the embodied one, so linked to the use of materials and other things. And you see here that there is a huge peak at the beginning, so that is of course this upfront carbon that we hear about, this upfront embodied carbon, which is really a very important part of the overall carbon emissions for a typical new energy efficient building. What's interesting to think of course, is that this one we can control now. What happens here, of course, to a part is controlled already at this stage, because we decide how energy efficient our building will be. But we cannot know exactly what will happen here. Of course, it depends on many things. But what we do know is what happens here. So that's the upfront carbon becomes really something that we can steer early on. So while so far, at least at the EU level and in most member states in the EU, policy has been focusing on the yellow bit. We are now looking at taking all of this into account somehow. So when it comes to policy development, I would like to split that into two stages. First, or two steps. The first step is to start to require the assessment of whole life carbon, as we call it, and the reporting of it. The second step then would be to start to introduce different kinds of quantified targets, limit values potentially, and so on. So those are two different steps. We are currently at the first step when it comes to the EU level. So why is this important? Well, first of all, it is a first step to be able to get to the second step one day, of course. But also, we see it as a way of spreading knowledge and understanding of what different actors in this value chain contribute with, and how different decisions that you take during a life cycle of a building project have an impact. It is, of course, to generate data, which we need for many different reasons, as you know. And it's really also a soft approach to start to reduce whole life carbon, because what we do hear from those who have started to require the assessment and reporting is that it triggers also a reduction of whole life carbon, because if you know that you're doing something in your project, you would like to do it better, most likely. We already see this requirement to assess and report in some different building policies. Policy initiatives at the EU level I'm talking about now. So last year there was a so-called delegated act in relation to sustainable finance on climate change mitigation. And there for big building projects, this requirement on assessment of and reporting on whole life carbon is there. My colleague Philippe, who comes after me, will talk a little bit more about what sustainable finance that initiative is, but in principle it is a way of defining what we consider sustainable investments to help that definition. So that is already an adopted act. Then we have two different Commission proposals which are currently being under negotiation, so between the Council and the Parliament. It is the Energy Efficiency Directive and the Energy Performance of Buildings Directive. The last one is what you heard Brigitte just referring to. So here again we have included this notion of, for the first time, of requiring the assessment and reporting of whole life carbon. So that was the first step about the reporting. The second step, to start to work with quantified targets of some sort, is really the next one. We are not there yet when it comes to policy initiatives, but we understand that we need to prepare for that. Because we want to be able to use benchmarks or even limit values at some stage. So therefore, we have the idea of setting out or developing a roadmap together with the sector, which would set out milestones in this regard. So what kind of roadmap am I talking about? We think that it should include quantified targets with milestones up to 2050. It should really set that trajectory into the overall perspective, let's say in the light of generally what our societies need to accomplish when it comes to carbon reductions, and what role should the building sector take in that regard. It should, of course, be linked to other work that the Commission is doing, in particular the work that is ongoing now on what impact circularity has on climate, or rather what contribution circularity can have to reduce carbon emissions. That's, I don't know if you got any wiser, but this is the thinking that we have about our roadmap. There are many questions still to be answered, but this is how we enter this exercise. We do not see this as a list of policy recommendations. It is rather so that future policy would have a look at the roadmap. It is not the role either of this roadmap, as we see it, to harmonize the way we report. This is a conversation that we need to have, but that is not necessarily to be included in the roadmap. The roadmap should set out these milestones. It should be a basis later, once we have the roadmap, it should be a basis for our climate objectives. So it should set out the trajectory for a decarbonized building stock by 2050, as I said. It should certainly underpin future policies and strategies so that when we are revising, let's say, the energy performance of building directive in a number of years, and when we are ready to start looking at limit values, then this roadmap should support us in that kind of thinking. When it comes to this development of the roadmap, which should be done by the end of 2023, we should, of course, be inspired by front runners. That's one of the reasons why we are here today. But we should also engage across the EU, because this should be something which is relevant to the whole of the EU, of course. We will relatively soon set up a working group which will help us and steer us in this work with experts. And we will. You may be aware of that. There is a high-level construction forum, which is very much involved in different work that the Commission is doing for the construction sector. Again, my colleague Philippe will come back to that a bit more. But we will use that forum to help us to set up like a subgroup, you could say a working group, to help us steer this work. It does not mean that we will only consult with them. There will be other kinds of stakeholder consultations. We already have a support study ongoing, which helps us to set out a baseline and trajectories where we would need to be compared to the business as usual case as well. We have some initial questions which we think are important, and we have heard other questions today, and you in the audience out there might have other questions, so please let us know. For example, should we have the milestones that we tend to set out for whole life carbon as a whole, or should it be split into operational and embodied carbon? Should they be based on carbon budgets or not? What should this shape look like? Should we start ambitious, or should we hope that things get really much better towards the end? And what is the role between an EU roadmap vis-à-vis national ones? So you see there are many questions to answer apart from just setting out the milestones, right? With that, I want to thank you. And I look forward to some questions later on, and also to be in touch during this development work. I'm sure we can work with the Nordics here to help feed in questions, comments, concerns, and ideas, really. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much, Josefina. We will move on to the last presentation of this block. We will listen to Philip Mosley, who is also part of the European Commission. Yes. Now I think it works. Welcome.
Thanks very much. And it's great to be here in Oslo. I've already seen some fantastic case studies and sites here. I'm from DG GROW in the European Commission. DG GROW is the Directorate General for the Single Market and Industry, and I'm in the construction unit there, where we are very concerned with the ecosystem, and it's one of the 14 industrial ecosystems defined in the industrial strategy. Construction is one of the most important, almost 10% of EU gross added value, a lot of jobs, of course, and construction is particularly, one of the features of the ecosystem is its absolute dominance by SMEs and even micro enterprises. But at the same time, construction, as we heard from Josefina as well, generates a lot of waste. It's the single biggest source of waste in the EU, with more than a third, and uses around half of all the resources. So what we're doing now, we have been working on for the past year, but we're in the final stages now, is this transition pathway for the construction ecosystem. So working towards these three words: green, digital, and resilient. And those three transitions are very much interchangeable and need to work together. We've been developing this work with the High Level Construction Forum, which is a forum of member states and also various stakeholders, industry, NGOs, and public authorities, and so on. We published a document at the end of 2021 for consultation, and now we are going through close to the end of the process, where we're drafting now the final transition pathway document. It went through various stages of, first of all, in the forum, setting out the scenarios for the transition. First of all, the first ideas that came in the staff working document, then more consultations and events and so on. And then we've had dedicated sessions in the forum, which have been voting on and deciding what should be the priority areas for action. And what the transition pathway is looking at is a range of things, but whole life carbon has been voted by the forum as one of the number one priorities to look at. It's also looking more widely at circularity and waste and the renovation wave that we've heard about. But also the digital transition is very much an enabler for a lot of this. So the collaboration tools like BIM, the automation on the building site, but also in prefabrication plants with robotics and so on, and the better use of data and product data, not only for whole life carbon assessments, but also data for improved productivity as well. And then there is the whole side of resilience, and here, the current situation with the war in Ukraine and the high prices is very much at the heart of this now, and the pressure that's being put on supply chains, the pressure that's being put on the availability of skilled labor, and the overall competitiveness of the ecosystem. And then other challenges go right across all of this. Things like research and innovation and procurement are all relevant. So it's going to pull all this together. And then we have in our construction unit in DG Grow, we are responsible for this, the Construction Products Regulation, which is the regulation that lays down the EU rules for the marketing of construction products. And now that is undergoing revision. To do two things: to improve the functioning of the single market, but also for the first time to integrate sustainability requirements for products, for construction products. We have our overall vision for the revision of the Construction Products Regulation is to boost the internal market for construction products and also to promote their environmental sustainability. We want to improve the competitiveness of construction and unlock its potential for jobs and growth. And this will help the industry to develop and deliver a more sustainable built environment, including improved safety and health. And the green transition and the circular economy will also open up new possibilities for business models and innovation. And in parallel, the digital transition of construction will make better use of product data, for example, with digital building logbooks and conducting life cycle analysis. And now we're moving from a situation of voluntary declarations to mandatory declarations with this revision. So at the moment, many construction products on the market declare their environmental performance using environmental product declarations, EPDs, and this information is obviously very useful for designers. So under the revision, we also want to implement progressively a set of mandatory declarations of environmental criteria, starting with global warming potential. So global warming potential or carbon footprint, to give it another name, would be mandatory for construction products. And this process will be integrated in the regulatory framework of the CPR and linked to the placing of the product on the market. And then third-party validation will be done by notified bodies. So overall, we want to ensure the harmonization of the reporting of environmental performance across the single market. So diving more into the detail of the CPR revision, especially when it comes to how we want to make a circular economy happen in construction, there are several elements that will facilitate circularity, and they are spread across the regulation, as you can see, in various different articles. But in general, we want to make it easier for reused and remanufactured products to access the market. We want to improve information, especially digital information, relating to circularity. We want to offer maximum flexibility for circular solutions to level the playing field with new products. And we want to make it easier to avoid surplus products becoming waste and to close the material cycles. So in order to meet the EU-wide climate and energy targets, it's also vital that we direct investments towards sustainable projects and activities. And to achieve this, we need a common language and a clear definition of what is sustainable. And this is why we have this an action plan on financing sustainable growth and the classification system for sustainable economic activities called the EU taxonomy, and a first delegated act for sustainable activities for climate change, adaptation and mitigation was published in December 2021, and it's in force since January this year. And now a second delegated act for looking at these areas now, water, biodiversity, pollution and circular economy, is being worked on and is expected either later this year or possibly into early next year. But that's also highly relevant to construction, so we've been working on that. And then despite the efforts to increase the uptake of circular approaches in construction, it can be difficult to measure the effectiveness of current measures using only national statistics. So we have a study ongoing which is aiming to elaborate on this and to understand what's the current situation on the ground in the industry. So how and to what extent actors in the construction industry are considering and applying circular approaches and what drives them to do it. So the study will look at, analyze the kind of data that companies are capable and willing to report. So it will develop indicators that especially SMEs are capable and willing to report against to measure the circularity. So ultimately there'll be a survey of companies that will give us some new data, we hope. The Big Buyers Initiative is something that we enjoyed on our visit yesterday to see the zero-emission construction site in Oslo, which is really a world leader when it comes to this. And Oslo's zero-emission construction sites is part of this Big Buyers Initiative. And there are a couple of working groups relevant to our topic today, the other one being circular construction. And these the Big Buyers is an initiative bringing together the big public procurement bodies, getting them to exchange on their best practices and also to learn from industry best practice. How far can you go with procurement? We've also developed guidance on construction and demolition waste. It's actually relatively old now. It's from 2016, which is why, despite it being quite well regarded, it was developed together with industry and authorities. We are planning to be revising this guidance now, the construction demolition waste management protocol, and also the guidance for pre-demolition audits. We're going to be revising these together into a new document starting from next year. And then when it comes to whole life carbon, there's also a lot going on in Horizon Europe with research and innovation funding, just to highlight the most relevant parts, clusters 4, 5 and 6, where there is a lot of activity in research and innovation, including the Built for People partnership in cluster 5, which is for a sustainable built environment. Some things in cluster 6 on bio-based materials in construction, and in cluster 4 concentrating on the transition, on the digital and green transition of the industry. And that's all from me. Thank you very much. Great to be here. Thank you. Yeah.
And I kindly ask Josefina and Brigitte to also come up here, because now we have time for questions. And I know there has been some questions in the chat asking if the presentations will be shared, and yes, they will be. So that answers that one. And if you who are in the room like to ask a question, please raise your hand and wait for the microphone. And people online, please use the chat, and we'll see. No questions. Yes.
Yes, Matti Kuittinen from the Finnish Ministry of the Environment. I would be interested in hearing that how was this very interesting process and the very interesting plans that you have presented today. Describe how did you achieve this, and what sort of comments and feedback have you received so far, say during this year, from different member states? I think that we here in the Nordics, we are relatively well aware of how what the neighboring countries are thinking, but what's the common sort of like barometer in the EU level, so to say?
Maybe I can start. I met with you last time in 2019 in Malmö, and you were really going ahead then, and the Commission, I think, was still struggling a bit. Part of the Commission was already trying to move the agenda, but the overall narrative was not really there, I think. And that has, as you said, it has really changed in the last couple of years. I think there are many things which has enabled that. I think overall circularity has moved higher up on the agenda, and that of course also spills over on the construction sector, not surprisingly, and the policy there. I also think that the fact that a number of member states are moving ahead in this direction, and data is being generated, and these conversations are being had, I think that has sort of benefited us as well. Or this development for us as well. And then I think simply the time was right. We had come so far that it couldn't be ignored anymore, and people have got a certain understanding of the potential of it. And then of course I think really the way I see it, also the sustainable finance work last year, which is of course not a mandatory work, but it's a voluntary tool, you could say, or a voluntary definition that you can work with, gave us a good possibility to include this kind of thinking as a starter. And there was very little question as to why we did it, and that sort of enabled us also then, or allowed us also then, to start to introduce it in other kinds of pieces of legislation, which indeed are more mandatory in nature.
from the chat. What pieces of information or perhaps data can help the upcoming policy development? Could be from the research side or anything else. So anybody who wants to pick up that?
Maybe I can answer that. I think I think it's well known that we need a lot more data when it comes to circularity and whole life carbon. And the Nordic countries and a couple of other countries, as we've seen, are moving ahead with policy and maybe have already some data, but there are quite a number of other countries where there isn't much data at all, which you could use to develop policies. And so I think it would be very useful to have more data from life cycle analyses of projects. And also so that we can start looking at what does a typical or benchmarked performance look like. I think that would be quite useful, something that the industry could maybe engage in.
Thank you. And actually, there are no time left for any other questions.
I wanted to ask Pano, when is the study being released?
Yeah, that's a good question. He has left the meeting, so we will have to ask him afterwards. But that's a good.
This autumn.
This autumn. All right. So this autumn, the study that Pani presented will be publicly available. And with that, we will have a 9-minute break. So 1:05, back at the computer or back in the room if you are here in Oslo. And thank you so much for now. We're going to move into the second part of this webinar, where we will listen to a presentation about development of limit values for CO2 emissions in buildings in the Nordic countries. So we will have 4 very interesting presentations, starting with an overview of today's regulation for all the Nordic countries. So I would like to welcome Morten Boos to the floor. Yes.
Thank you very much. I will just give you a very short overview of what does the landscape look like today when it comes to the building LCA regulation in the Nordic countries, to kind of set the scene for the deeper dives into the development of limit values in each of the countries. So a very brief introduction from my side. Starting from the top, we may say all countries have national carbon goals. We have a EU carbon goal as well, looking ahead to achieving climate neutrality. We have different aims, especially Norway kind of taking the lead, aiming for becoming carbon neutral in 2030 already. We have Iceland in 2040, Finland 2035, and so on. And when it comes to the regulation and or the implementation of building LCA within the construction or building codes, some countries or all countries are actually working on this. Some countries have already implemented. We saw a little bit about this in Pano's presentation earlier, but Sweden and Norway have already implemented the first set of regulation on this. Denmark will follow shortly in January next year, and Finland will follow up in 25, maybe 24. We'll see. And when it comes to the limit values, Denmark will include a limit value already in the first set of legislation for buildings above 1,000 square meters. Finland will include the limit values as well, and Sweden are already looking into this, what should be the next step of the regulation in Sweden. Estonia and Iceland are working on the subject, developing proposals for method, but haven't any political decisions yet. If we just take one closer look at what does it look like when it comes to the scope of the different methods. One important thing to say is that all countries, of course you may think, but all countries base their methods and development on the same standards. Just to make that clear. And this figure just shows which of the life cycle stages, as defined in those European standards, are included in each of the countries. And we have upcoming proposal in Iceland, so it's not included here, but this figure shows in the darker blue what is already decided, what has been implemented or will be implemented, while the lighter blues is that's currently a proposed method. And I don't have the time to go into the detail of this, but you see some differences and some similarities, and we should all remember that this is a snapshot. Things are developing very fast. If we look at it next year, I'm quite sure it will be different. We will see some blue colors for Iceland, I believe, and who knows, one day maybe we have a full plate, a bingo, you might say, covering everything, but I don't know when that time will come, but it'll be interesting to see and follow. And that was actually what I had planned to say. So thank you all for listening in. 4 minutes on me.
Thank you very much. We will move on with our next speaker, because as with the first part, we will at this point also have questions after the 4 presentations. So I would like to welcome Matti Koitinen from Finland.
So good afternoon, everybody. Regarding the title about limit values, it's a very short story. We don't have limit values yet, and we are just in the process of setting them and going through that what would be a suitable and relevant limit value. So there isn't that much to elaborate on those. But what I will do is that I will explain to you what is the framework that is required for the limit values. So as you know, we are, as just has been explained, yes. We're going to have 2 new decrees, one on the climate side and one on the material side, and these both are then linked to the question of limit values. If we first look at the climate declaration side, it's going to include information on carbon footprint. This is going to be mandatory for all buildings that will require a building permit and that need to have an energy performance certificate. So if your building requires an energy performance certificate, then it will require a climate declaration. And for new buildings that mustn't exceed a certain E value in their energy performance certificate, there will also be limit value. So we are trying to do this hand in hand with the existing energy performance regulation. Then there is another side to this climate declaration, which is what we call with the umbrella term carbon handprint. These are the potential climate benefits based on European standards that include the classic module D circular economy benefits, long-term carbon storages. We heard interesting news about those earlier today when the European level plans were presented. Then we have carbonization of concrete, surplus renewable energy, and we are also looking at what could be the role of trees. If you plant new trees, say on a brownfield site, how much can they sequester carbon during the assessment period? However, the limit values will only apply to the footprint side. There wouldn't be limits for the handprint, but we hope to boost the markets to compete with the size of the handprint. Then what's linked to this is indeed the material declaration. It's going to include information on building components of the object of the assessment, materials within these components, at the moment breaking down to say 12 different categories, and then the origin of materials, whether they are renewable or non-renewable, recycled or even reused, or if there are any harmful substances. And this is linked to the limit value discussion so that the scope will come from here. So what you will calculate in your life cycle assessment is basically the scope of the building components that you have in your material declaration. But this document will serve other purposes as well than just the climate declaration. So what's been important for us, and I will just repeat this again, is that we would like to seek symmetry with energy regulation. So again, if a building in Finland requires an energy declaration, it will also require climate and a material declaration. And if it has to stay below a given E value, it must also stay below a given C or carbon value. So we felt that this is important for the sector, that have learned that, okay, these and these building topologies need to go through a certain process, and there are buildings that are excused of that burden, if you will. So we want to keep it the same way. So in terms of the scope that is included for the limit value assessment, we will be looking at the building and the site separately, and the limits would only apply to the building. So its frame, whether it's underground or below ground, doesn't matter. But then what's on the site, say foundations and piling and excavation and stabilization, these we consider that these are choices made in city planning, not in the building design. And therefore we are planning of excluding those from the limit values. And of course the limit values will be defined for different use classes separately. So how to speed and enhance the uptake of the limit value thinking then? Our recipe for that would be building information model. When in the future one would be applying for a building permit, we have planned that you would need to give in also upload your building information model. That's going to be a mandatory requirement for getting a building permit application. And from that model, we would hope that the professionals would automatically generate the material quantities that you need in your calculation of limit values, because that's, as many of us know, is the most time-consuming stage in life cycle assessment, and the one that is most prone for errors, and in which the machines are better than humans. So this material quantity takeoff would be used then for both material declaration and climate declaration, and we would get from this side the material contents for building products, and for here we are looking at the emissions of building products. And the data for which the limit values would then be calculated with would come from either from environmental product declarations or from the existing national generic database, which is available for everybody who is interested in English at the website co2data.fi. Still something about the building information model. We are also planning to store that in IFC format for future use, so the information wouldn't just be used for making the limit value regulation possible. So the overall thinking is that the BIM tool would be communicating with the LCA tool, and you would get iteratively quantities out from your BIM tool to your LCA tool, and then the LCA tool would give feedback to your design so that you can secure that you will keep below the given limit value throughout the design process. And all this would then be saved or uploaded to a digital platform for the built environment, which is going to cover, as the name implies, the entire built environment, from product level to buildings to cities and to entire country. So we would like to start following the flows of carbon and flows of materials, and currently we are building a digital platform for this subset of the entire sort of value chain. And I like to finish by the quest that we also have ahead of us is our goal to become carbon neutral in 2035 requires that we very well understand that how much of this emission side here that we need to push down, how much of this comprises of new buildings, and how can we, in a compatible matter, compare the emissions that come from construction projects to national climate goals. And that's something that I believe would be requires methodological development, but is also super helpful if we can get it working. Because otherwise, I don't ultimately see a very big point in the exercise of making LCA if it doesn't really support your country's climate goal. And furthermore, as we have the goal of becoming carbon negative, then increasing the sinks here also justifies our approach to including the carbon handprint side, so that we can start to manage that also in the context of the built environment. This was the latest from Finland. Now we will continue our Nordic tour.
Thank you, Matti. Now we will go to Denmark, and please welcome Lucy Ryck, who will present from Denmark. Just gonna make sure I find your slides here. And here they are.
Thank you, Maria. My name is Lucy. I'm from the Danish Housing and Planning Authority, and we are working with a regulation for construction in Denmark, and I'm working with the upcoming ACA criteria for buildings. Short, what I will talk about is I will give a short status about our work with limit values. Then I will talk about the challenges we have been facing in regards to that, and our further work with the limit values. Okay, so let's go 2-3 years back, how everything started. So in Denmark, we got some climate partnerships for the different sectors. And the sector for construction, Klimapartnerskab for Bygge og Anlæg, recommended to implement some limit values. Short after, few months after, Build, which is like a research institute in Denmark, made a report looking into 60 buildings and coming with some recommendations of where could you put a reference value or limit values. Then about a year later, we had a big political agreement about a national strategy for sustainable construction, and we had an agreement on to implement limit values from 2023, and also where to set these limit values. And since then, we have been working intensively on our regulation, and finally, in the beginning of 2022, we have sent it to the national hearing and got some very interesting and qualified comments back, and have done some smaller adjustments on that. And right now, it's laying on the EU notification, so it's like in the EU hearing where other member states can comment on it. And soon it will be over on the 19th of September, and then we will hopefully implement it in our regulation for buildings from January 2023. Yes, and a short overview of our regulation, because as you can see, there's like a lot of different approaches to it. So basically all new buildings in Denmark which apply for a building permit from January 2023 have to document the climate impact of their buildings. And for buildings over 1,000 square meters, they also have to make fulfill a limit value, which is on 12 kilos CO2 equivalents per square meter per year. And for the calculation, you can use some generic data, which we also have been, which we have been logged, which is based on Ökobaudat, which is a German database, but you can also use EPDs. Then we have been working on some appendix which defines which building parts do you need to implement in your regulation to make the calculation comparable. And of course also which life cycle, which service lives you have to use and how to calculate the area. And then we have been working quite intensively also together with BUILD, which is the research institute, on few buildings which we assume will not be able to be within the limit values because they have some certain functions, for example, some hospitals or some laboratories. So we have been worked on some certain regulation for them, or some. But I will come into that in a second. So we have been working with the limit values. No, our challenges with the limit values was basically that the politicians have set the limit values out of this graph. So they had an overview over, okay, how many buildings are placed around 12 kilo CO2. And as you can see here, it's like 10% of the buildings are performing worse than 12 kilo CO2 per square meter per year. And that was the ambition they wanted to set in the beginning. And this was the baseline for the political agreement. And then we have been working on how to make the regulation based on that. And we could not go too far away from the baseline which has been set there, so the methodological basis. So we were kind of stuck into a lot of things there, but we have been working with it in the best possible way. But also shortly to the report from BUILD, they looked into just 60 buildings, which is not a lot if you think about that we are like building 7,000 buildings in Denmark per year. But it was the best baseline we had back then. Yes. And one of the challenges we, for example, had was that in the baseline of the 60 buildings, the area has been calculated in a certain way, which was related to how do we calculate the area for the energy performance. But we assume that this area is not necessarily representing or giving the right incentives, because you have some certain areas in the building which is built with fewer materials, for example, garage or staircases. So because of that, we made a small adjustment, which is, for example, that you just take 25% of staircases which are outside of the building, or of garages, you just take 50% of the area. And through that, we hope that we give the right incentive, that you not just start building bigger to get a lower result of your LCA calculation. Yes, and then another thing we did was that we looked into the building model, as it's called in Denmark often. So it's like basically the degree of detail. So which building parts should be implemented in your calculation. And again, we couldn't go too far away from where the baseline was set from the political agreement, but still we made some minor adjustments, again, to give the right incentive. Then we have been facing a lot of challenges with the use stage, basically with module B6, which is like the energy use of the building, where we have like some emission factors for electricity and district heating, which are based on scenarios which the Ministry for Energy has been done in 2019. So it's pretty old scenarios, but again, it was the baseline for the limit values, so we kind of needed to stick to them. And we can see that there are some differences in how are the projections done. For example, we have more political agreement about incentives with electricity, so we have a more precise scenario in that matter. So we actually had it in public hearing, and one of the comments we got back was that the industry wished for that we can have some specific emission factors for district heating, because in Denmark you have like different district heating companies, and so we actually give allowance for that. So at district heating, for example, in Copenhagen can make their own EPD, and then you can specify your calculation on that. But this is in general a bigger challenge we have, also because we don't know, do we maybe incentivize that you use heating pumps in or that you prefer to use heating pumps than district heating. So this is something we definitely have to look more into in the future. again in mind what was the goal with this criteria, and how can we give the right incentives. Then another challenge we had was what I shortly mentioned in the beginning. Some buildings will automatically have a need for more materials than maybe more conventional buildings. For example, if you have a hospital or a laboratory with big vibrations, you automatically need bigger fundaments, or if you build a building close to the harbor. So we made a report together with Build, which looks into, okay, how can you give an allowance to maybe extend this limit value if you have a really certain function to fulfill with this building. And the report just got launched last week, I think, and they also have an English summary, so I think it's very interesting to look into. So we give the possibility to extend this limit value if you can documentate that you really have a certain function which needs this extension. And the same for additional energy use. In Denmark, we work with the EPBD, the energy performance of building, that you also can extend the energy use baseline if you have some certain function, for example, a swimming hall. And this additional energy use you have from the energy calculation is also not part of the limit value. Our further work with limit values, just shortly, this is our little roadmap about political decisions in Denmark. And in 1 year, we need to talk to the political parties about the upcoming limit values, because we will tighten them every 2 years. So from 2025, we will put a new limit value, and this will be valid for all buildings, also under 1,000 square meter. And we will have to present some possible limit values. And these are a lot of points, and I will not have time to go in there, but we will, for example, also look into, okay, we need first of all to represent the existing building mass with more cases than 60 buildings. And out of that, the political parties can decide, okay, how much do we want to tighten them? But then as well, we also want to look into, okay, where should we put the limit values in regards to our Danish carbon budget, and how to do it? How can we make the link between our LCA criteria and the carbon budget, and is it even possible? And we will also look into, can we maybe add some more modules or phases of the life cycle of a building? Yeah, and a lot of more things, as you can see here, but I think my time is over. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And for our last Nordic tour, we will go to Sweden. So Kristina Einarsson. Yes.
Thank you, and hello everyone. I'm going to give you an update on the regulation on climate declarations of buildings in Sweden, and a proposal on limit values that we're currently working on to be introduced 2025. I work as a project manager at the authority with this new assignment on this topic. So we have new regulation, as you have heard many times today, on a completely new regulation on regulation on climate declarations for buildings. And this regulation apply for those who apply for building permit from that date. We have a completely new act, ordinance and provision on climate declarations. And there's also a change in the Planning Building Act. Climate declaration is a requirement to receive a final clearance. So this means there's not so much a task for the municipalities other than control this, that there is a declaration. But otherwise, it's not a bigger task for the municipalities. The climate declaration is to be registered at Boverket. We handle an e-service for this climate declaration. It's a digital format we have adjusted for the industry and the different tools that they use, so they can easily transform the climate emissions from the building into this register. They get a confirmation immediately when they finalize this and through email, and this is the confirmation that they will give to the municipality before they can get a final clearance. So we're building up a register so we can follow up the development of the climate impact from this from the buildings. We're responsible for the supervision. We will check the accuracy and whether the data that they send in the declaration are reasonable. The developer need to save the basis for 5 years, so we can request the basis, more information that they register to us, where we can check the quality of the data. We are now building up an e-service so they can handle this basis on an easy way. And we try to adjust on the type of tools that they are using in the sector. So some of the important elements for us when we do this supervision is to check level of coverage, how many products are included in the climate declaration. They also need to verify the products that I've used. At least half of the products from the climate impact, they need to verify that they really put this product into the building. We also will check when they made this final calculation. We know in the early stages you don't have all the information, so we want to really see when this calculation is made. But also if there have been updates. We know that they change sometimes the products that were calculated in the beginning. We want to know if there have been any changes that might affect the climate impact. And these are important issues when we introduce limit values. So we're looking on putting a level on the coverage, also level on the verification, and also set a date. When can you make this climate declaration? When can you send it in to us? And also that clarify on the updates that are needed. Since March this year, we have a government assignment on continue to work with this legislation, and we shall investigate and propose on how limit values on climate impact from new buildings can be introduced earlier than 27. We shall also look if we should introduce climate declarations for reconstruction and extensions, also if earthworks should be included. And we will submit a proposal on regulation, so this is a step closer to the upcoming new regulation. We will also look if there's need of other measures necessary for the next step. And we will make an impact assessment, and we will give a report in the middle of May next year. And we have plans to translate this report to English, since we know there's an interest in other countries on what the legislation in the Nordic countries. So shortly about our process when we're working with this. Starting point are 2 reports. It's one from Boverket, the proposal that we left to the government on the next step of legislation. It's from 2020. And there's also another report from the Royal Institute of Technology with reference values. So these are 2 important reports. I will shortly go through these reports. We have given an assignment to KTH and the consultant WSP and IVL, Swedish Environmental Institute. We've been working a long time with them, so we continue with the same experts. They have the assignment to submit a proposal for limit values to us. They will give a report in the middle of October, and there was a public hearing in the end of August where we presented a proposal, and we have given comments on that. So we will continue work with and make our impact assessment after the proposal from the consultant in October. And as I said, we will have a report ready next year in the middle of May. So the proposal from us from 2020 was to introduce limit values for module A1 to A5. And this is what we are working on now. But also to expand the climate declaration to include more modules, all the building life cycle stages, and some supplementary environmental information. We also propose that include more building elements, installations, interior surface finishes, and room fittings. And we propose a reference study period for 50 years. Very shortly, and this report is also in English if you want to have more information on that. The study on reference values from Royal Institute of Technology is a study on climate impact from construction of new buildings. These were constructed during 2015 to 20. And this report is from December 21, and we have now reference values for detached houses, multi-dwelling blocks, offices, and nursery school and schools. It's a small study, 68 buildings, but anyway, we think this is quite a robust material for us to continue with limit values. So the proposal that was presented on the hearing in the end of August was that it looks like it's possible to introduce limit values 2025. So we're working on a proposal, and I really want to highlight this is really a proposal still for new buildings and extensions for module A1 to A5. And we also include more building elements in that limit values. But we also propose that at the same time, 2025, to extend the climate declaration, more or less according to our proposal in the report from 2020, the whole life cycle, more building elements, to mention some, but also to expand it to extensions and reconstruction and earthworks. But we really need to look closer. Is the industry ready to this next step and include so many things? We need to look closer and make an impact assessment. I want to give you some kind of a hint on the limits that we are working on, and this is really a complex picture and too short time. But anyway, perhaps I'll give you kind of a hint anyway. So this is all the 68 buildings that were in the study, these 5 different building types. And we have set on the top, you see a line, 75 percentile, meaning that 75% of the studied building, not the level of the emissions, are below that line. That we say is our, if you call it baseline or reference value. So we are looking now if we should decrease the emissions according to that line. Our proposal for 2020 was 20 or 30% lower from a reference value, and that is the 75 percentile. That is what we are currently working on. The proposal on the hearing was to introduce a limit value which is the median. It's a little bit above 20%, meaning less than 20% lower, for all the building type except for the nursery schools. So this is something we're looking closer to, and there was no, on the hearing, the public hearing, they think this is a reasonable introduction of limit values. But we need to look closer, and especially what is the effect on small and medium-sized companies. The big companies, they're quite prepared for this. We are also looking on limit values after 25. We know that the industry want to be prepared for the next step. So now we are looking closer if we should change these limit values every 50 years. We think it's too often to do that every 2nd or 3rd year, which industry says. But having regulation in place, it's not a quick fix. 2 or 3 years, we need to study and see the effect of the previous legislation. So we're looking on different levels, alternative 1 and 2, 25 or 50% lower, next step. And for the detached houses, we see that the potential is not as big, so we have different levels that we're looking on. So finally, my last slide. This is a really important thing for us now to look closer on. We have a generic database from Boverket. We have construction products which are conservatively set, around 25% higher than the average. And the purpose with this is that we want to have a stronger incentive for the designers to choose product-specific EPD data or specific data in the calculations and in the declaration, but also to give incentive for the manufacturer to produce more EPDs, but also to produce products with lower climate impact. And we can see this effect already. So for us, it's important to see, should we continue with these conservative values in our database with limit values? It depends on what we want to steer, while we are waiting for the legislation in place in the EU, so we can require specific data, because that is what we are interested in. We want to know what they have in the building, not when they're using our database with generic data. So this is something it's really important for us to look closer. How can we steer now until 25? And then when we have the EU legislation in place, then we will probably adjust us to a typical value. So that was my last slide, and we have more information on our website, and you're welcome to contact me if you have any questions. Thank you.
All right, so I will ask the 4 presenters to come up here again, and we will have time for a few questions. Let me see, and it's for you. Den är inte på. It's not on. All right. So we actually had some good questions from the chat, so I'm going to start with that, because those of you who are in the room, you can talk to each other during coffee break. So I will prioritize those who are not here. So first question. You say that LCA calculation can be done with generic or EPD data, and we also have heard that it will be mandatory to declare CO2 in relation to the CPR. In the future, will this new declared CO2 value, will it be mandatory to be used in LCA calculations? What do you think? Or what are your view on that?
I don't know if I understand the question, but we are planning in the next step to require specific data in the final climate declaration if it's possible. When it's possible, I would say.
Yeah?
No, yeah, I think in Denmark you have to use generic data unless, like the generic data we have, unless you have EPDs. And we in Denmark, we don't know what the CPR will require, so I think it's dependent on if they require EPDs, then we can also require more EPDs maybe in the regulation. But as it's uncertain, as far as I know at the moment, we cannot require something certain.
Yes, in our case, we have drafted the decree so that you can use either generic data or EPD data. But then when the building has been completed, you need to update also your building information model, and you need to include into that all realized data. And that could be interpreted also so that if you have products that come with EPDs, you would need to include those, and hence this would then apply to the climate declaration. So you would have to update your climate declaration so that it's being calculated with real data. And then the question that what happens with the difference that you first have the climate declaration with generic data showing maybe much higher figures, and then you get the real data and the real figures that are lower. It would be great if we could give some financial incentives for, getting lower and lower when the building is taken into use, but that's still an open question.
Thank you. We will take the next question. Yeah, this was a good question. Will the limit values for the different countries also include values from modules B to D?
In Denmark, we have a limit value for all the modules you could see. So it's like A1 to A3, and then B4, B6, C3, and C4. So we have a common limit value for that. But as I also mentioned in the presentation, we will tighten the limit values and re-evaluate them. And we'll also look into advantages and disadvantages with, for example, having module B separated. Yeah, we need to see what the incentives are by putting the limit values in one way versus the other.
And in Sweden, as I said, we're going to have limit values for module A1 to A5. And one of the main reasons is that when you go to the use stage and end of life stage, it's based on scenarios. So that is the main reason for us to have limit values for module A1 to A5. And we don't want to include the B6 because we think there are already policy instruments, regulation in place handling that. So we think that it will be a double regulation if we also add this regulation to that. That is the background for that's what we're working currently.
What Sweden is doing makes a lot of sense, of course, that you will avoid the dual regulation. In Finland, however, we are going to have A, B, and C modules for the limit value, with the justification that you could then choose your strategy of how to go below the limit value. Should you be very material efficient or energy efficient, or some sort of balance between these? And module C is important so that we avoid the problem of biogenic carbon as a negative value staying in the loop and the results being distorted. So that's again one of the details why the C module is important.
Thank you. Okay, so this is a little bit broader question regarding national goals in carbon reductions. The Netherlands has a very comprehensive transition team with a timeline for achieving these goals. Is that something that some of the Nordic countries have? And if so, where can these be found or accessed or something like that? So a little bit broader question.
Well, in terms of all the Nordic countries, of course, we are gathering data in our Nordic projects, and we are just updating our online repository of how the process is going in different Nordic countries. So yes, there is already data available from Swedish Life Cycle Center's website, and there will be additional information from other websites soon. But in terms of the international, transition roadmaps, as we referring to what was presented from the Commission's level, at least in the case of Finland, that's highly dependent on the government program and what the politicians have decided to do for each of the government periods. And we are just about to start a new one next year, so it remains to be seen what sort of ambition level the next government would have.
I think in regards to the buildings, we have in Denmark very limited knowledge about it at the moment, but it's, as I said, we will re-evaluate the limit values next year, and this is definitely something we will try to look into more and more and develop some methods for it. But it's also very difficult at the moment because how to separate the different sectors, and we are not taking the whole life cycle of the building in account right now. So at the moment, to have the linkage between our LCA method and the carbon budget, we are very much in the beginning, but it's super interesting and important to look into.
In Sweden, we have environmental indicators for the sector with the life cycle perspective. We have 2 years, they're a bit behind, so we cannot follow up exactly from the year. But the latest data is from 2019, so this is important data. And it's from the construction of new buildings, but also from existing buildings, annual emissions from the sector. So this is a very important tool for us to follow up, but also the register that we are now building up. We hope that we can use the data after some years when we have enough buildings in our database.
Thank you. And I also had one specific question for Sweden. Why not include Module D?
We have proposed some additional information, and we get a lot of this question. So our proposal is to include the information on biogenic carbon, but not the others. We think there are maybe other steering tools to handle that in the waste legislation. So there are other steering mechanisms possible to use. But also in the Plan and Building Act, we have regulation in place to handle that. So we're not sure this is the best tool to steer those questions.
Thank you. And with that, we have no further time for questions. So thank you very much. We have one final very exciting hour left. And we will start with a presentation about the new standard. So I would like to welcome Anne Rönning.
And first of all, I would like to thank you all for giving me the opportunity to present this work, the work with the standard of ISO. And it's a joint work with CEN, the European Standardization Organization. And I'm, in addition to working as a researcher, I'm an expert in the standardization work, both in Europe and in ISO. So I work with TC350, developing the product level standards and also the building level standards, and a new coming standard for refurbishment of buildings, for those of you who is not aware of that. Yes, so I have been the convener of the work in ISO the working group under TC 59 subcommittee 17 that has developed this standard, the data templates for the use of EPDs for construction products in BIM. So I will go through why this standard is needed and how we technically solve the need for machine readability and also the machine interpretability. It's not only reading the data, but also letting the computer understand the information. So, as you can see, and probably know that it has been a stepwise development of EPD. The EPD started in the 90s, the need for communicating the complex data in an LCA of products, and products in general, not only for construction products. And to me, I say that the EPD is an executive summary of the LCA, specified in a standardized way. And in the first years, 10, 15, 20 years, it was more of a static document. By that I mean it's a document, readable for people, and provided as a PDF file. Then it started the need for digital EPDs, as we saw that EPD information, especially in the construction sector, it's not that the EPD is the end information. It's needed for building assessment. And then machine readable, the numbers, the level of numbers was suddenly used. But what we saw and see, those digital EPDs that are available, to some extent they are still, even though they are machine readable, they are needed people to read the information, do some recalculation often, and especially regarding the scenarios need to be recalculated. Or other information, I will come back to that. So what is then ISO 22057 doing? It's about doing the information from EPDs, both machine readable and understandable by computers. So as you know, and what several of you have said today, the EPD are the data source for the building assessment on different environmental aspects. And the EPDs are used when doing up the building in year 0, as we have seen. But it also is used and can be used as an information source, and should be, as the standard 15978, which is the building level standard, requires that EPDs and also those different modules shall be included. By this I mean, on the top you can see the building level. All the same modules, the same information as on the lower part, product level. So the EPD is not a static document, a static information. It is needed for instance, doing up the product stage A1 to A3, information about how this specific product should be handled when installing it, and also during the use phase. And what you see here is some information from the EPD can be used also in B4. So what this is all about is how this data can be transferred, digitalized, without people needed to read the data. So this standard is about how all the information can be transferred. It doesn't say how the formulas for doing the building assessment, because that is dealt with in the EN 5978, but this is about how the data are transferred, exchanged from the manufacturers to the specific or the specific project. As I said, this is a standard developed both as a joint work under the Vienna Agreement, as it's called in the standardization world. It's both representing the international standard ISO 21930 and 15804. It actually addressed both the new 15804 plus A2 and also make the possibility to use the data from the previous version, as we know that those EPDs are still available and need to be available for some years still. But what has been very, very important in this standardization work is the fact that we all know that BIM exists as a concept. It's a lot of information exchanged under the umbrella of building information modeling. And for this work, EPD data or environmental data is not any special information needed to be dealt with differently. So it's important for us in both SEN and ISO to make sure that what we develop for transfer exchange of environmental data, EPD data, shall follow the same way that other information in the construction sector are exchanged. So that has been very important. By that, we have this standard. What I say is that the background standard for product EPD is 15804. For the building assessment, it's 15978. But as much as important, this standard 23307, data structure for data templates, has been the most important standard for this work. It's about what we call data templates, product data templates. So a template is a standardized way of exchanging product or system data through the life cycle. So this is about how computers can understand the different type of information. It's not for environmental experts like me, but it's how it's bridging the environmental knowledge until the use of the data in the BIM context, and the computer scientists, how they can actually make use of the data. So I'm not telling you anything about the sheet. What's also important for us was that, yes, the goal is the environmental assessment. But also, what Matti said, it's exchange between the BIM model, the life cycle assessment data, how that can interact, which is on the right side. And then on the left side, you see that EPD data follows the ISO 22057 data template format. But as you know, for doing a building assessment, you need also other data. It could be generic EPD data. It could be data, for instance, data like what is the life cycle data for the Finnish electricity production. Of today, it's not an EPD for that, but it makes it also possible to transfer or to develop all kind of data needed for doing the environmental assessment in the same format, the PDT structure, and by that we can fill the templates with data, with actually data, and then we call it a data sheet. So a template for whatever kind of information for a construction product filled with information, could be EPD information, then we have a product data sheet for that specific construction product, along with other information about the product. So what I'm going to say here is that all those properties in 15804 has been converted into 22057. By that I'm saying that the EPDs of today do not fulfill all shell requirements in the EPD in a digitalized and easy accessed way. So we have information about the general information about who owned the EPD, how long is it valid, what is the methodological framework, and also all the results and technical information for scenario development is included in this. And what do I mean by that? So, for the computer to understand this, every single property has its own identifier. It means that, for instance, global warming potential has a unique identifier, which is a long number of letters and numbers. That means that the computer will understand what global warming potential biogenic means. And it has also the possibility to understand that, okay, this is emitted in module A1 to A3, or it understands that B4, it understands the concept of B4. So everything of this is made it easy for those making LCA tools to use the data. So we have made all the properties available. So what we see is that scenarios may be difficult, but important. So what we have done is that you all know, those of you who are familiar with 15804, that you shall describe the technical information, the background information you have used to develop your scenario. We see that in many EPDs of today, that information is hardly there or are so untransparent that you can't use them to do anything relevant with the scenario. What I mean, you can't use them for recalculate. And what do I mean by that? The computer in this, on the building level, will, by using this, then have the possibility to do the assessment. For instance, A4, is this scenario representative for my study? Yes or no? It depends on, yes, it is transport by truck, but it's a different distance. The computer have information about the distance due to specific GUIDs related to the site. And then it makes it easy for tool makers to make an easy formula to recalculate the scenario from 50 kilometers to 248, for instance. Or it says, no, I'm not, it's not by truck. I would like to have all this by train. So it makes it easier to change the scenarios. So it can be used fully, or it can be used partly by some of the information. For instance, fuel type and consumption, and but change the transportation distance. So all of this is available in the standard to make the scenarios more specific for your specific project. So what I would like to say at the end is that the advantage is that by using those developing EPDs, by also adding on the 22057 that follows the PDT concept, as for all other information related to construction products, that's important. So the manufacturers do not have to have different way of documenting their products. So it's not a standalone approach. It's the same as for other information. And it forces EPDs to follow all requirements in 15804 and make the data machine interpretable, less need for calculation. So my final slide is that, okay, we have the environmental assessment and the BIM interaction as a goal. We have environmental data and the PDT structure for a lot of information for construction products. The exchange format is there. It is in use. and it will be further developed. So what I'm saying is that the technical data for exchanging these is solved, but we do not necessarily have the tools that handle those and use the full potential of the data today. So, thank you.
Now we will listen to, let's see if I can find this presentation. Yes. Yes, it's here. We will listen to Lars Myhre.
Yes, thank you. I will follow up what Anne Rønning have presented about these data templates and the structuring of EPD information. I'm the technical director of the Norwegian Home Builders Association. We are an association in the Confederation of Norwegian Enterprises. Our members consist from big developers to small home builders, and we represent some place between 50 and 60% of the total market in residential units in Norway. We have for many years been working actively on digitalization and BIM. We were co-founders of Building Smart International. We had the leadership of ISO TC 59 and ISO TC 59 SC 13. We were early adopters of the IFC format, and we had the leadership of the Committee in Standards Norway on data templates. What we have been working for is simplification and let the computers do manual work. And that is much about information exchange. When we have this building, there are many processes related to the planning, design, etc. of this building. Each of these processes has been sort of handled as silos, as independent work. We want to connect that. We want to see this as a whole, and we want to have the BIM model with the information as the core of it. And that the same type of information does not have to be typed in, punched in several times. If we look at product documentation, this is different types of product documentation we have in the Norwegian database on materials, Byggtjeneste. The suppliers have to provide a lot of different documentation for different purposes. And all this documentation is printed as paper or published as PDFs. Piles of them. And nobody actually can use all the information in it. What we want is one-stop shopping. And that is where the data template concept comes in. So all those who want their information to be a part of the product documentation, whether it's BREEAM, whether it's SINTEF technical approval, or the directorate here in Norway with information, they must get that information, those properties, into the data templates. So the suppliers of materials have one place to put all the information. And these data templates should be according to the European and international standards as Anne referred to. So this is not something specific for Norway. This is the way to do it. And to present my way, my understanding of this data template, not the rather complicated sketch that Anne presented. The data template consists of different property groups where environmental information is one property group and the EPD information is one subgroup within the environmental information. We have these properties, that is essential characteristics, which you are supposed which you must declare according to the harmonized product standards and the construction products regulation. We have market information, color on products, size of it, weight, etc., environmental information, and we have the product identifier. All properties are declared in these data templates. And data templates are developed for each product group. In the template, we have the reference for all of these values. How is this property, the value for the property, meant to be measured or calculated? Precise definition, very exact. And we have this GUID, this Global Unique Identifier, which is a 22 character and unique. And it's this thing the computers use to know what that value for that property actually means. We have been working on this for many years now. In 2018, my association, took the leadership of the the committee in Standards Norway working on data templates for building and construction. This was done in cooperation with a lot of stakeholders in the industry and with the authorities. In 2019, we in the association went out and challenged all the material manufacturer suppliers to provide machine-readable product information according to the PDT concept within 2022. We have 3 months on that, and we had COVID between. In 2020, we had a Seeing is Believing at our annual Home Builder Conference, where we presented how CO2 emission global warming potential calculation could be done automatically and based on machine-readable PDT information. What we did there was that there are suppliers of cost calculation programs. They use BIM model, information on the amount of materials from BIM, and they connect that with information on the price of the materials. And they have an export via IFC, which is an open format, from the BIM model to the cost calculation program. So we thought, yes, what if you substitute the Norwegian kroner per material with CO2 per material? They have the account, they have the amount, it's just to change. And they showed here how that could be done based on this PDT concept. And we had Co-Builder, a Norwegian software company, who sort of helped us there. This was in 2020. It was just to show that it is possible. In last year, 2021, we challenged Byggtjeneste to present EPD information according to this standard of ANNE, ISO 22057. And Byggtjeneste, they have, that is a sort of database. They've got all the material suppliers, or most of them in Norway, presenting their data. And when you go in there, you can get a lot of information. Here, for instance, rock wool, thermal insulation, with different types of product information, including EPD, environmental declarations. But this is provided as PDFs, which is not very helpful. So we challenged them, and we said, we have this draft standard from ANNE. There are a lot of annexes in them, a little too many for the suppliers to fill in everything. So we said, well, what is the minimum for you to deliver to be according to this 22057 format? And we scoped that down and gave it to Byggtjeneste and said, let your producers fill in this. And we showed how it could be done with an example. You have existing EPDs. This are the information you should put in the template with GUIDs, with everything structured according to that 22057. And we also needed some additional requirements related to biogenic carbon, which is not covered very well in the 15 804A1 version of the standard. It is not covered. So we have some Norwegian supplementary additional requirements stating that. But in total it was not too many values they had to transfer, and then this could be presented according to the PDT template. And in April 22 this year, they presented this. And they have, via an API, now software developers can get this information from BygTjenester with the CO2 GVP information from the EPDs. We have not taken the rest of the environmental information in the EPDs. And as an example, we have this Holte, which has a smart calc, cost calculation program, which used this BIM information, IFC exchange, and couple it with cost prices. Now they get the quantity from the BIM, the number of square meters of a product. They get the CO2 or the GVP information from BygTjenester through the API with the EPD number as identifier, and together with the price you get the GVP value, the number, done the same way. But we have some challenges. One is conversion factors. Well, the GVP calculation is very simple. It's just an amount multiplied by an emission factor and then sum up for all the materials. The problem is we have so many different units. A simple example, lumber, which in the industry is normally priced by length, where in the EPD, in the Norwegian EPDs, it's in cubic, and in the Swedish Boverket database, it is per kilo. Nobody buys lumber per kilo, so it has to be a conversion, and that is a little tricky because there are so many units. These are the units in the BygTjenester database, different. A lot of them, but we need to keep track on that. Another challenge is, as Anne said, the EPDs are not static. They shouldn't be considered as that. So what I say is actually that the EPDs should be only A1 to A3. That is the facts. The rest is scenarios. And the scenarios and the results of the scenarios should be left to the greenhouse gas calculation tool. Maybe the EPD should have some additional information you need to make these scenarios. If that information already is not in the product data template or the product data sheet you have, because some of the information you need assumptions to take here are well as valid for the other properties. The lifespan, expected lifespan of the product, that is also important for many of the other properties you have. So we need to see this as a whole. Going back to this slide from the 2020 Seeing is Believing, this was a very simple slide. It was a builder with a BIM model, it was this smart calc program, and it was suppliers showing how you could send the information. This slide has been developed in close cooperation with the Association of the Norwegian Manufacturers of Construction Products. And in a way what we have so far ended up with is up here on the right, the design phase. We have the BIM model, we have some calculation tools, whether this is the Holte Smart Calc, Reducer, 4C Group, Nordconsult, there are several now jumping at this because they get the data. The data are available. And they calculate. And they get the information through, for instance, the BygTjenester or some other suppliers, but the data are owned by the producers, by the manufacturers. They own the data. And these are not databases. These are more hubs for transporting, exchanging information. So the manufacturers, whether it's product-specific EPDs or it's project-specific EPDs, they all commute the same way and through this format. And we also have PDT Norway, which are developing these PDTs, not only for EPD, but for all information you need about products. And for the EPD information, it is in line with 22057. And we have here, during the construction, on the construction site, the contractor get this budget from the designer, and they have to show that they fulfill, that they comply with that budget. It's like an economic account. You have a budget, but all the invoices shows whether you are in line or not. So they have to gather information from based on the actual products they have used. And then what if they don't meet that? Well, then they have some follow-up process. Because when we get a limit, you have to be below it. And if they choose the wrong materials, well, you're in big shit. And finally, we also have some common work on ID numbers and conversation factors that we will do sort of centrally to help this. But what we then say is we should avoid silos, and we should not look at greenhouse gas calculations as one sort of the thing. It is a part of everything, and with this data template concept, we have a way of exchanging information. And the interesting thing would be how stricter greenhouse gas requirements will affect the whole building process, because we have to work in a quite different way to fulfill this. So, thank you.
Yes, thank you. Now we will be moving on to the presentation about the programs, the Nordic programs. So I'm just going to wait for Helle to get ready. Yes.
Well, hello everyone. I hope you're still with us out there and you in the room. It's been a very, very interesting day. I really enjoyed both the worldwide perspective, the EU, all the Nordic countries, and this very specific input now, because we need those data to fulfill our requirements. And I will actually somehow jump a bit back, because when there were the Nordic presentations, you might think, oh, they are so different. And yes, we are not totally the same way as we're doing it, but we really exchange a lot, and it could be much more different. And that is what we're working with in this Nordic Sustainable Construction Program, where I'm the head of secretariat. My name is Helle, and I work at the Danish Housing and Planning Authority, but I work on the Nordic collaboration. And one step back, because the Nordic countries have a vision. We call it Our Vision 2030. And it's nothing less than the Nordic region want to become the most sustainable and integrated region in the world. And to do that, the Nordic, at that time, the Nordic housing and construction ministers or civil servants came together and said, if we want to reach that aim, there's something about construction we need to deal with. And they made this declaration, a Nordic declaration on low carbon construction and circular principles in the construction sector. And they also said that for all of this to happen, we need to bring people together. We need academia, we need the industry, we need organizations, and we need the civil servants. And you need to talk together. And that was when ambitious countries organized this first Nordic Climate Forum for Construction, which was in Malmö. You see Maria, who's moderating, she was there as well. And there's a lot of faces that goes again. And that's why we are doing this again, to share the information that we are creating together and to get a bit closer to the declaration that the ministers made back then. And one of the things that was in this declaration is this quote. So it's the Nordic ministers, but also large CEOs in the Nordic countries that stated, if we want to be ambitious, we have to remember that we cannot be reached without enabling a rapid change in our ways of building, renovating, and living, and without compromising safety, affordability, and quality of the built environment. So this is a balance that we always have to keep in mind when we do new regulation, new methods of working, and improving the way we work. So then, what to do in, what can you say, real life? How will we get closer to the declaration? And there we formulated a program, and that is the Nordic Sustainable Construction. And the aim of this program, that started mainly in the beginning of this year, is to support the ambition in the Nordic Vision 2030 to establish the Nordic as a leading region in sustainable and competitive construction and housing with a minimized impact on climate and environment. So these are our two main focuses. And then there's a lot of other things to focus on, but this is what we mainly focus on. And then how to do that. These are 5 areas that we'll look into. You'll memorize them by the heart now? No, but I'll tell you more. So the formulation started before, and there was some started in 2021, but it was really taking speed in 2022, and it ends by 2024, this phase. And then the first work package, you have it here. This is focusing on life cycle assessment and data, and it's run by the Ministry of Environment in Finland. And this is where the civil servants developing the climate demands, or how to deal with data, BIM and all these things, they meet regularly and discuss these things and exchange good arguments and good methods and lessons learned. What are the challenges? Because there's a lot, there's no easy fixes here. Yes. And then the second work packages, it's circular business models and procurement. It's run by Nordic Innovation, which is an organization under the Nordic Council of Ministers. And it focuses on business models, how to make them more circular, and also how to make procurement that is more in line with circular economy. Work package 3, sustainable construction materials and architecture. It is run by Form Design in Sweden. And they go around and take the debate. What is a sustainable construction material? And what is the role of architects? And they do that both in the Nordic countries and EU and internationally. And then there is work package 4, emission-free construction sites, and that is run by the Ministry of Infrastructure in Iceland. And here there's a focus on a declaration from the Nordic ministers, a definition, what do we mean by a construction site, where are the terminology, the limits, the boundaries, focus on what kind of products do we have, what service providers are out there, what technology is there, and then that should end up in some guidelines and rules and advice to regulation. So of course there's a strong link between that and here, and many other links. And then work package 5, that's a program secretariat and a focus on capacity building, and that's run by the Danish Housing and Planning Authority. And that's where I'm seated together with other good colleagues. And we work to make sure that the program and the 5 work packages know what each others are doing, of what kind of knowledge is created, that we know each other. We work to create capacity building activities and to make sure that the program is anchored in the Nordic construction industry, so that all the knowledge we are creating is also reaching the construction industry, and that we also get input from the industry, because this is in this balance that we actually can get much closer to the Nordic vision. It can be very difficult to understand what I just said. So I have some examples, and I go through all the packages rather fast. But you saw the slide before. But it's just to show you that even though there's a lot of differences, this is also because the Nordic countries is in the beginning of the phase. And there's a lot of details between each of the phase. What is the area? What do you include in the model? How do you do this all the year? What is the lifetime expectancy of the building? All these things we discuss. And it's not always that it's possible for us to agree, because we have our politicians who, of course, have their they should make the choices. But what we do is that we make sure that we know what each other are doing, and also when we make a proposal for something new to be looked into, we ask what are the other Nordic countries doing, so that we not, without knowing, make different choices. So we try to align as much as possible and as much as what is good and reasonable. Work package 2. Actually, if you sit out there and you want to, really want to be more prepared for all those things that Philippe talked about, all the circularity that is coming, they organize workshops that are free to join, and where you can meet other Nordic colleagues and get inspiration on how to make your business model more circular. So concrete steps, which will really be products that will be very much demanded. I think so. Work package 3, they've been busy this summer. They started at the Norwegian Bauhaus Festival in Brussels, that is trying to make a bottom-up focus on the built environment, what to be done there. We shared Nordic perspectives there. And then all of the Nordic countries have these democracy festivals, we call them, where we discuss many things. And they went around there and discussed the role of architects in sustainable construction. And more is coming, and we'll hopefully also be at the COP27, and then next year there will be the United International Architects World Congress in Copenhagen, and we'll also have some activities there, taking the best knowledge we have and trying to put the debate out there. Work package 4. We try to make a Nordic declaration on emission-free construction sites. What do we mean, or why are we working towards it? And get the terminologies right. And then work package 5. I mentioned some of it before, so because I have a red sign, I'm over time. I will just say that one thing we're also looking into is capacity building activities for reuse construction materials. It will be a tender we'll put out later this year, hopefully, where we'll really focus on how actually to use reuse construction materials in new buildings or old buildings. Questions, please put them in the chat for later. And if you want to know more, someone asked earlier, where can I find the information? Actually, we try to gather it all here. We can't gather all of it, but a lot is there, and you're most welcome to follow us on LinkedIn and Twitter, and you'll stay updated all the time. And this program is financed by Nordic Innovation, which is an organization under the Council of Ministers. Matti, the floor is yours.
So, for our last presentation, last but not least, of course, we will listen to Matti Kuitinen. One more time.
Apologies for that.
No, not necessary, I think.
So I wanted to just very, very briefly brief you about a project that's ongoing called Nordic Networks for Circular Construction. Many interesting stories start with somebody being jealous with their neighbor. This is one of those stories that started that way. How is it possible that in Denmark they can do things like this? They can nicely saw out pieces of old brick walls. They can assemble them into modern architecture, and if that wasn't enough, they can also take old windows, paint them black, and have a computer arranging them nicely in a nice composition in those gaps between the reused blocks of bricks and concrete. It's not fair that Denmark can do this and other Nordic countries can't find the way there. And that's why we started the project, in which we try to reuse and recycle the policy principles or the shortcuts through policies that the Danes have identified already. And of course there are lots of interesting policies in other Nordic countries that others would benefit from. So that's why we started during the Finnish presidency in the Nordic Council of Ministers. We started this program called Nordic Networks for Circular Construction. We get quite a good team for that. We have 3 ministries from Finland and a Finnish Innovation Fund as well. We have a Danish authority, Swedish authority, Norwegian authority and Icelandic authority. And we are running this with over €1 million budget for a couple of years. And what are we then actually doing in this work package? We have 7 tasks. These one painted with green are already ongoing. Could just mention that there is one that's focused at analysis of barriers and possibilities, asking the questions, why can Denmark do this if Finns don't know how to do it in terms of reusing stuff in buildings? And then we are also asking the questions that could we actually measure that what is circularity in buildings? So how circular is your building? Can you put a number to that? It might sound a bit naive, I give you that. But then on the other hand, there is some development in this field going on in the Netherlands, in Germany, and also EU's very own level system has some factors that could be used in this exercise. So we are exploring those. And then we are of course also discussing that how should we change our construction culture so that we would consider something that has had a previous life to be valuable and even desirable. And even if it wouldn't be the romantic like weathered brick facade that you can reuse, if it's something that's super boring and super dull from 1980s bad architecture, can we still somehow learn to accept it, if not love it? So this is what we are working on, also on this sort of a bit more like a level of philosophy and attitudes. And then we are going to set up a collaboration platform, arrange national fora for this, and also produce some online learning materials. I'd like to finish by explaining briefly that what's our take on circular economy, because there are so many projects that are dealing with this at the moment. So we wanted to first start from acknowledging the planetary boundaries and planetary health. These are the these are the boundaries that we mustn't trespass. Then something that's interesting and important for us as humans is of course the cultural heritage of the built environment. That's something that is dear to us, but there is a contradiction between these two. So to which extent can we value this, and to which extent should we just be concerned about trespassing planetary boundaries and health? So we are trying to maintain and increase value of the cultural heritage in the built environment in 4 aspects: by developing new business models, by developing digital solutions that we just heard of, very interesting news from Norway, very fascinated, and then by enhancing production so that it's less harmful, and also by addressing lifestyle actions. So this is our take, and I'm inviting you to follow the project and to also attend the events that we are hopefully arranging next year physically. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And by that, we will have time for a few questions. So the 4 of you who have presented, please come up here. And lägger den där in case. All right. So we have this one you need to share. I think that Helen and Matti has their own. All right. So I'm going to start with the questions from the chat again. So starting with a few questions regarding the first presentations. What are the differences between the data templates and the product passports that will be part of the Eco-Design Directive? Does anybody know the answer to that?
Would you like or me? I'm not sure. I'm not sure. What I do know is I think I know is that the passport hasn't decided the format for digitalization. So maybe EPDs are in a earlier step where we could provide the format for the rest of the digitalization, as I assume will follow BIM standardization anyway. So it's there, and it's recommended by us to use it.
Yeah. And the second question about those presentations, how do you handle EPDs for multiple products presenting an average?
Okay, so that's a very interesting question, because the PDT allows you to make, well, we are developing EPDs, as you know, for an average, it can be done for an average product for one manufacturer, or it can be an average from several manufacturers, and you specify whatever it is. But the advantage with the when you put data in the PDS is that you have one EPD, and you may by the filling in data, you can have one EPD with several PDS filling out, so you can actually make one EPD from an average, and you can provide all the different background data representing the average, if you like.
Good. And there was a question, where are the good guide? Sorry for that. Grid. Where are they regulated?
Well, they are given in the EN ISO 22057 standard. They are provided there. And it's very important that we have one GUID per property. So now we have it, thanks to Anne and her team, we have that.
Good. And all of the examples that have been shown are in regards of building material. What is the status when it comes to technical installations of buildings?
It all depends on whether there are EPDs out there for technical. The PDT approach is valid also for technical and all other information. So you may use it if you have the EPD as the background information, and those data can then be provided through the PDT as a product data sheet with data.
Thank you. Are there any questions in the room? Yes.
Thank you. I wanted to ask Matti and Helle if now you're doing Nordic studies, cooperation work. Is there any interest from other EU member states into what you're doing? Are you being approached by them to learn more? Or is it rather that you are seen as those weirdos which just go ahead and and others just think that, well, let them go on with it, it's not really of what we care about? I'd just be curious to hear how you, if there's any collaboration or interest shown. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you for the question. Is it on? Yeah. It's a very good question. It's very important for us in Nordic not just to be in the Nordic bubble. We know we are part of the EU and the greater world, so it's very.
I've heard of that.
You heard of that? Yeah. It's connected. But we have a long tradition, and we have the vision, and we have funds to do more together. So this is what we're using to benefit each other. But it's very important for us not to work in a silo. So we have questions and dialogues with Belgium and the Netherlands, for some examples, and there's also someone from Canada interested. So we exchange where we can, but it's also where we have the communication. As I said, we try to gather all the information we can and make it in a way that it's possible for everyone to read. So we actually do a lot in English. We could choose a Nordic, to make sure that we can share as much as we can. There are also, forums as part of the EPBD process, concerted action, where the different countries share experiences, and we work as much as we can with the time that is there to share what we can. Because as you see, there's a lot of challenges. We haven't found it all, and we just really like when there's approaches and good questions and input from other countries. So if there anyone out there, please, it's more than welcome. We try to engage as much as time allows.
Yes, maybe I could add that we are also collaborating with Baltic states. So we have Estonia along in the team, but because we are being funded through the Nordic Council of Ministers, so that sort of like sets the site where we should be operating. But of course, for instance, high-level construction forum, very useful arena. So looking forward to more communication. We've also been in touch with Canada and New Zealand about their legislation. So there is some connections.
Thank you. No, I didn't mean that it was up to you to make all these links. I know you have limitations in what you can do, and still what you do is great. I was just more wondering if there were others who heard about your work and maybe reached out with some questions. But okay, because I would assume that will come now that we're talking about it in relation to coming policy as well, and they hear that you are working on at least some kind of harmonization between you. I would expect that it would raise some questions among other countries as well. So hence my question. But thank you.
Yeah, at least there is regular connections to UK, many European countries, Canada, USA, Japan, China, New Zealand, and then OECD. So these are contacting us, and we are exchanging. So.
Thank you. Yes, I know that there was one more question, but there is no time left. So I'm sorry. We need to wrap it up. Thank you very much. And I hope that you have found the presentation as useful and interesting as I have. And we have actually come to the end of this webinar. But before I will let you go, I will take the opportunity to say 3 things. First, I hope we will meet again in a year when Finland will be the host of the Nordic Climate Forum. And you will all receive a short evaluation form, so please answer that so we can improve the Nordic Climate Forum before next year. And the third thing, thank you Norway for being the host of this forum. And last but not least, thank you everybody who has attended, both here in the room and online. Thank you.